Hi, I'm Charlotte Curtis, Head of Adult Services with your Livingston Parish Library, and we're here today in the Denham Springs Walker branch of the library. And I've got some very special guests today. You're going to love today's segment. First, I want to introduce you to Brandy James, and she is with LOHSEP. And the first thing she's going to do is explain to us what the acronym stands for.
Okay, LOHSEP stands for the Livingston Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. And every parish and every county in the country has an office like that.
That's great. So, when something is coming towards us, like a tropical depression or flooding or something, your office is where we go for information and for help. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Anytime there's a storm or any other kind of disaster, as with like the COVID-19 thing, we're immediately activated and we're working around the clock, even when everyone else is home or at home preparing for this sort of thing.
Oh, and by the way, she mentioned COVID. Notice that we are 6 feet apart. And I took my mask off when we started speaking so you wouldn't see me looking like the Lone Ranger, with the plank mask.
Yes.
So I didn't think of COVID when I was thinking of your office.
Yes.
So did you all arrange for testing and masks?
Yes, we work closely with the state, with GOSEP, the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, FEMA, DHH, I guess now they're called actually LDH.
Right.
We work with everybody, all the state agencies, just to make sure that all first responders are getting the proper PPE, which is personal protective equipment.
Right.
And any number of other things. Constant conference calls so that we're all on the same page and know what's going on, that sort of thing.
Speaking of the recent COVID crisis, when we had the tropical depression coming through last week,
Yes.
I was particularly concerned because I know that we still have people that are in vulnerable states. They're not supposed to get out in public. And I wondered, what would we do with those people if they had to evacuate? Have y'all made provisions for that?
Yes, every time there's a storm, we make provisions ahead of time. Now, COVID made it a little bit more difficult for us this time. So we did stuff like we follow American Red Cross guidelines for sheltering. So initially, or actually I should say usually, their square footage per person, I believe, is around 35 feet. Because of COVID, we sought their guidance again and they upped it to 110 square feet per person.
Wow.
Yeah, and so we had plans for shelters if we needed them, but shelters were only a last resort because we're trying to keep people
Safe.
Social distancing and stuff like that. So
when things have returned to whatever normal is going to be, COVID-wise, if someone had to evacuate their home and seek shelter, and they had someone with special needs, say a child with autism or perhaps a parent with dementia, are there special shelters for those population groups?
There usually is. Most of our shelters in the parish are general population. Got it. But LSU, well, I should say the state usually opens a special needs shelter at LSU, and if it's determined that somebody is going to need medical attention throughout the sheltering process, then they would go there.
So the process would be, I would call your office and
yes, we would coordinate that for you. Yes.
So if you've got any questions of that nature that are specialized, she's your contact person. So, and the office is located where?
We are in the town of Livingston. We are in the same building as the Office of Motor Vehicle. We're just above them on the second floor.
Oh, good.
Yes.
All right, so everybody knows where the DMV is.
Yes,
so
everybody knows where that is.
As well as when we needed to get in touch, it was very easy for me to look you up online and just call.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you a question because I told you that the first thing my mama always did if she knew a hurricane was out in the Gulf was we had to bleach the bathtub and fill it out with water. Now, I ask you, did Mama know what she was talking about? And it's okay, Mama's been gone, so her feelings won't be hurt.
Doing that is not recommended, actually.
Why not?
It's not recommended because The water can, if you leave it sitting, it can get bacteria in it. You don't want to drink that water. There's also potential for lead in the pipes that could get in there, so you don't want to drink it. Even if you were to boil it,
Right.
it could get rid of the bacteria, but not necessarily
lead.
the lead. Right, so that could cause issues. Now, if you think you're going to have a water problem and not be able to like flush toilets and stuff like that,
It's good for
wash
that.
clothes, that sort of thing, you can fill it up. However, you really need to see what your emergency plan is for your home. Like during hurricanes, they typically, I'm sure as Jay will point out, can create tornadoes. So if part of your emergency home plan is the bathtub is where you need to be if there's a tornado, it's best not to have the
Water
tub
in
full of
it.
water. Yes, yes. So, yeah. It's always best, my recommendation would be to recycle, like milk jugs or something, and just fill those up with water and store them somewhere.
And that's what
and
my
then-
husband and I do now.
Yeah,
So-
and of course, that can be used for flushing the toilets, washing clothes. You can also use it for drinking water. Plus, everybody goes to the store and buys bottled water every time there's a storm. So I would not recommend doing the bathtub thing.
And it was odd because we never actually used it. It was there.
Right,
If
which-
the hurricanes come and you filled up the bathtub. I never even thought about tornadoes
Right.
because I know in a tornado, that's typically,
The safest place.
yes, and that's where we get.
Yeah,
So
yes.
let's see, we did that. You mentioned the special shelters at LSU, and you mentioned an emergency plan. What sorts of things should we have in our go kits?
Okay. Yeah, so it's a good idea to have an emergency plan for every household. And then you should also have an emergency kit for every household. Then you should also have a go bag for each individual person within that household, to include pets. And so
Wait, pets. What do you do with pets if you have to evacuate?
that's tough because a lot of shelters do not allow pets. However, at our parish level, we allow wildlife and fisheries to take over pet sheltering at that point.
Really?
Yes. And so there's a possibility that if you have to evacuate, you won't be able to take your animals, or your animals will be separated from you. So again, in your emergency plan that you should have ahead of time, you should have provisions for the pets.
So I would assume they would need things like their vaccination records so that they know they're up to date on rabies and.
Right, that needs to be in your emergency plan. Part of your plan and your, household emergency kit and everything. You should have all the important papers. You should have all your birth certificates, social security cards, contact numbers in case, people get separated. You should have your information on your pets, all of those sort of things.
Do you need pet food?
Yes, I would plan for everybody, including the pets, to have at least 72 hours worth of clothing, food, water, that sort of thing.
So if I have 4 big dogs, so I would bring a big old bag of dog food.
Right.
And I should bring then gallon jugs of water for the dogs?
You can. Of course, they're not going to let your animals starve or, anything
No, I
like
know.
that. But it's better for you to be able to supply that to them rather than them trying to get it. I mean, they're going to try, but if something happens like the 2016 flood and you can't bring things in because we kind of became a little island,
Yeah.
It could be difficult. So it's better for you to be prepared ahead of time.
Right. What if I were going to take my dogs to a shelter, understanding that they'd be separated from me, bring bowls too?
Bring anything that
Okay.
you can do to
So just
to
like
help.
feeding them at home?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Medicine for
Mm-hmm.
myself?
Yes, I would at least have 72 hours worth of medicine, of medication.
So 3 days?
3 days, yes. And typically what I do is if I know storms are coming and I'm getting low on something, I immediately call the pharmacy and just
Oh, yeah.
ask them to refill it, and I just have the whole thing with me. Because you never know. Typically it's 3 days. It could be more, it could be less, just,
Well, as we all saw in 2016.
right. Yeah,
You know.
yeah, because I wasn't home for 3 or 4 months, so, yeah.
And lots of folks here were in that same
Oh,
shape.
there's still some people who aren't home, but
No.
we're getting there.
what would you say is the most common question that people have for your office?
We get a lot of questions. A lot of our questions are always about, are waterways going to close? Do we have sandbags? Do we have tarps? Where's the sheltering going to be? But the majority of the calls we've been getting lately are, is there anything out there to help me raise my house? So that, I don't flood in the future.
Again, yes, after 2016, I can imagine.
Yes, we get a lot of those calls. And, FEMA does offer funding to elevate homes. And so we get them set up with the right person to start the process.
And see, I never would have even thought that your office could provide that kind of information.
Yeah, the grants department used to be within my office. It just recently got moved over to the president's office. But we're still, and we're all one big team. So we still get those calls, and we just send them over to a lady named Sarah Allen. She handles all those elevation type grants.
That's great. So if people would like to raise their house so that they don't have that happen to them again.
Right.
They go there.
It's potentially available, yes. Of course, you've got to go through a process, and it could take 6 months to 2 years to get it done once you start with the paperwork and getting approval and all of that kind of stuff. But, everybody's doing what they can to try to lessen the potential for flooding.
And while people are going through that process, you mentioned sandbags. So what happens when we've got something sitting out there in the Gulf as far as sandbags?
Okay, so what we do is we contact all of the fire department chiefs and ask them if they need sand and sandbags, and if they do, we deliver it to their locations. And the population can just come in and fill their own sandbags.
But you have to bring your own shovel, right?
Not necessarily. A lot of the times the fire department will have some out there. I mean, it's best to bring your own just in case. You never know how many people are out there and how many shovels they have. But for the most part, it's pretty much covered. Now, there are some people that, they might be older and not be able to fill their own sandbags, or they might have some kind of health issue that prevents them from doing that. Typically, the sheriff's department will help out with that. We have a sandbagging machine, and we will bring it to them, and we bring them sand and sandbags. They'll have them filled. Yeah, they'll have them filled, and they'll actually make the deliveries to those people. Of course, they're not going to just do it for everybody. You actually have to have a valid reason for them to bring it. Otherwise, it's at the fire department.
So that's good. So if somebody has been sitting home because they don't think that they're physically able to fill the bag, they can still contact your office and get help. Yes,
everybody can contact my office. During any of these kind of things, my office is the hub. We're the emergency operations center. Everybody's working out of our office. The fire departments, the sheriff's office, the PDs, anything you might need, you just call my office and we coordinate it out.
And that's the advantage of having that centralized hub.
Yes, ma'am.
And then, of course, you're working so closely with the governor's office.
Yes, in constant communication with them, yes.
Great. And I know one of the people that you're in constant communication is our second guest that will be here today, WAFB's Jay Grymes.
Yes.
So when we were talking earlier, you said that very often you would watch a briefing and then call him for to get the layman's terms as to what that really meant.
Yes, and when you do a briefing with the National Weather Service, they're talking about the whole region. And so a lot of it doesn't get drilled down to your specific area. So then once I get off of that call, I typically call Jay and ask, for his input on it and how it's going to affect us.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, we certainly dodged a big one last weekend. I'm hoping that we get through the rest of this upcoming season. But, fingers crossed, but be prepared, because it's always better to have things and not need them than need it and not have it.
Yes, like I told you, our motto is prepare for the worst, hope for the best. But you should always be prepared, yes.
That's great, that's great. Thank you so much for coming and being with us today.
Yeah,
I've really enjoyed, and I've learned a lot.
Oh, good.
So, and now I'll never have to bleach that bathtub again. So, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And here we are with part 2 of our special segment on hurricane and emergency preparedness. And we've got a real treat for you today, because Jay Grymes from WAFB has volunteered to come and give us some special instruction on hurricanes, the history of hurricanes, and pretty much just an overview of everything you need to know about hurricanes and bad weather, specifically as it relates to Livingston Parish. So thanks so much for taking time to come down here and talk to us today.
Oh, Charlotte.
I can't wait.
I appreciate the invite. Happy to be talking to the folks out there. And hopefully at the end of this, and it's going to be a little on the long side, so get the popcorn ready. But we will, I think we'll talk about some things that will make people more aware of just how impactful tropical weather is in the Bayou State.
Well, good, because as you know, a number of you were expecting to get to see Jay Grymes in the flesh at each of your branches. And when we had to take our little COVID vacation, he was generous enough to film this presentation. So if we had been in the branch, we of course would have the popcorn machine out and you'd be eating it. So you can put us on pause, get your popcorn, and sit back and settle down and get ready to take notes, because you're going to learn a lot today. Okay, thanks.
Well, thanks, Charlotte. And I have to admit, that's the first time I ever heard it called the COVID vacation. But anyway, so here's the thing. What I want to do is just give you a sense of how important hurricane preparedness is here in Louisiana, including here in Livingston Parish. Many people think it's just the coastal parishes. That is far from the truth. And so you see my title, Hurricane Awareness, Hurricane Preparedness. Part of this storyline here will be just to make you aware of how threatening tropical weather is right here in Livy Parish, and therefore making sure that you're ready to go should a storm come our way this season or any of the subsequent seasons. All right, so here's a map, and you can see I've outlined Livingston Parish. This is a map of all the hurricanes that have passed nearby Livingston Parish since the 1950s. And you see there's about 6 or 7 tracks there. And yeah, you guys have had hurricane force winds in the parish. In fact, there have been winds that exceeded 100 miles per hour in the parish in the past. 100 miles per hour, that does more than take down trees. That takes off roofs. So you do need to be prepared. Now I throw in all the tropical systems, tropical storms and tropical depressions, and you can see it is a mishmash of activity. Now we're going back to 1850, so we're talking about 170 years, but that is a pattern that suggests you've got something rolling by or over top of the parish about once every 2 to 3 years. And that's why I need you to be ready every year. There's never a year where we can afford not to be prepared for tropical weather. We've already gotten off to a crazy start here. Here are 2 storms in May. 2 storms impacting the United States before the season even officially began, and then we've had our very own Cristobal roll through Louisiana. That's 3 storms, the 3 fastest storms to form in any season going back to the 1850s. So 3 storms already here in the middle of June in a season that we know is going to be active, and all 3 of those storms impacting the United States. What does that tell us about the rest of the season? Well, first of all, let's take a look at what the experts are saying in terms of storm activity this season. And keep in mind, these numbers were put together even before those 3 storms showed up. So normally, in a typical Atlantic tropical season, we have 12 named storms. Remember, named storms are tropical storms and hurricanes. It doesn't count tropical depressions. Of those 12 named storms, half of them become hurricanes. Of those hurricanes, half of those become major hurricanes, categories 3, 4, or 5. Now here's what the NOAA experts have to say. Basically, we're talking about the Weather Service and Hurricane Center tropical experts. And what I want you to notice is they give a range. And some people say, well, why don't they just give a single number? Well, that would be, you're never going to guess the exact number. What we want to look at is the range. And notice that the range for all 3 values is equal to or more than the average. Bottom line, good indication that the experts from NOAA think that this is going to be a season that will probably see above normal activity. So then I went and looked at about a half dozen other groups that also do forecasting. Some of them are private meteorological firms. A couple of them are university groups. Another one actually is from Europe that does this kind of work for clients in the Caribbean. And here's what they collectively have to say. And what you see there is the numbers are essentially the same, if not just a little bit higher. So now we've got multiple expert forecasting groups that are giving us an indication that storm counts are going to be above normal for this upcoming season. The question is, how much above normal? That's question number 1. And then question number 2, and this is the one that really is important, and it's the one we can't answer. It's not really about how many storms, it's how many are going to impact us. And that's really what we want to focus on. And the problem is, I'll tell you right now, I can't answer that. We've already had a crystal ball, but I want you to be aware of, there's still a very good chance that Louisiana could be dealing with another named storm before the season ends. So here's the reasons why these groups are thinking that it's going to be a busy season. Number 1, the Atlantic Ocean is warm. There's what we call the sea surface temperatures are a little bit above the norm for this time of year. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Computer a little slow to respond there. So what that means is that, remember that warm water is the fuel for tropical systems. So if the ocean is warmer than normal, it's kind of like when you pull up to the gas tank and instead of putting 87 octane in your car, you put in the 93. Higher octane, more fuel, presumably more energy. So here's a map of ocean temperatures as of the second week of June. Now, and you look at that and you're saying those numbers, 22 degrees, that looks awfully cool. That's because those numbers are in centigrade. It's what scientists tend to do. So let me give you a little help. 27 degrees centigrade is 81 degrees Fahrenheit. And many of you know that there's kind of a rule of thumb. It's not hard and fast, but the rule of thumb is when the water gets to be 80 degrees or above, it is more than warm enough to fuel storms. So what I want you to notice is, look at all these 28s, 29s down here, where you see the yellows and reds. Anywhere that water is yellow or red colored, that's where the water is more than warm enough to support tropical systems. So we've got basically activity all across our part of the world. And notice the entire Gulf of Mexico is already good to go. By the way, Gulf of Mexico is typically warm enough about 9 months out of the year to support storms. So that's not a surprise that the Gulf is warm enough. It's certainly not a surprise that the Caribbean is warm enough either. But remember, I said water temperatures are warmer than normal. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to take away these numbers and show you a map of what we call temperature anomalies. And what I mean is, what is the water temperature actually compared to what we typically expect at this time of year? And anywhere you see shades of yellow to orange to red, that's where the water temperature is warmer than normal for the second week of June. And when you look at that map, you go, holy cow, virtually the entire tropical Atlantic is warmer than normal. Except, wait a minute, look what's going on here in the Gulf of Mexico. Where you see that blue, that's where the water temperatures are a little cooler than normal. Come on, computer, there we go. And you might be thinking, well, why is that? And you know the answer for that. What happened the first week of June? Cristobal rolled across the Gulf of Mexico. And as it rolled across the Gulf of Mexico, it turned over the water. And it cooled it off temporarily. Those blues are going to go away probably in the next week or so. And by the end of June, we'll be back to a warmer than normal pattern across most, if not all of the Gulf. So don't be fooled by this. Plus, remember, even if it's cooler than normal, it's still already warm enough. So we've got the energy there in the Gulf of Mexico and we're good to go. So sea surface temperatures, warmer than normal, there's reason number 1. Here's reason number 2. Wind shear is expected to be relatively limited over the Atlantic this season. Now, what do I mean by wind shear? It's winds increasing with height. And we're not talking about winds near the surface. We're talking about winds 2, 3, 4 miles, even 5 miles above the Earth's surface. Because that's where the top of tropical systems exists. So let me show you, let's think of this as a schematic drawing of a hurricane. And we've sliced through it like a cake. So you're looking at half of the cake where we've taken the front half off. And yeah, the eye is like a chimney. You can think of an eye of a hurricane just like a chimney. And so, you know, the chimneys are built vertically. They're not built tilted because a tilted chimney would mean that the fireplace didn't burn efficiently. Hurricanes are the same way. When the chimney is perfectly vertical, that's a storm that can intensify. Wind shear doesn't occur near the water surface. It occurs up inside the middle and upper portions of the hurricane like this. So this arrow here is indicating wind shear. And what it's doing is it's taking the top of the storm and beating it up. And that can weaken, or if the wind shear is strong enough, it can effectively kill a tropical system. Now, during El Niños, and you've heard that term a lot, El Niño, we're not going to talk about what it is other than simply it's a condition of warm water in the Pacific Ocean. When the warm water is in the Pacific Ocean, it turns out that we end up with more wind shear over the Atlantic Ocean. Well, this season, there is no El Niño. And so wind shear is expected to drop off and stay on the lighter side through the season because of the lack of an El Niño, which means not necessarily more storms, but it means that storms that get started have a better chance of getting stronger with time. So there's reason number one, reason number two, and now let's get to reason number three. The persistence of above normal activity in recent years. Now, some statisticians and purists would say that's not a reason. But the fact of the matter is, since the mid-90s, the activity in the Atlantic has been awfully busy. Look at these stretch of years here compared to everything before. And by the way, there's 3 storms already for 2020. But you can see that clearly since the mid-90s, things have been on the upside in terms of Atlantic activity. That does have a bearing. The fact that we're in this positive, this increased activity phase suggests we'll probably continue that way for some time. All right, so first of all, when do the storms typically come to the Bayou State? Now keep in mind, with the graphics I'm showing you here, we're talking about all of Louisiana. Not every storm that impacts Louisiana is going to have an impact in Livingston Parish. But any storm that's coming our way, you need to think of as potentially having an impact right here. Because we don't have the skill to tell you exactly where it's going to go. So what you see is, over the course of the season, remember, hurricane season officially begins on June 1 and officially ends the last day of November. Well, the first thing that jumps out for many people is, wait a minute, Louisiana's been hit by a storm before June 1. That's right. One storm, a tropical storm, Arlene, back in 1959, moved in near Morgan City and delivered tropical storm force winds. So the reason I like to highlight that for people is that while clearly the main activity for Louisiana is September followed by August, you can't wait to August to get ready. You need to be ready right now. And by the way, Cristobal does a much better job of telling you that than I can. You saw that storm coming our way, and you knew there was a potential for some impacts in our area, and hopefully you got through that storm without any real effects. So you see that we've got activity that peaks in September, and we actually have had a major hurricane in June. Many of you have heard about it. Some of you were even here. That was Audrey back in the 1950s. That took the lives of an estimated 400 to 600 people in Louisiana. So killer storms can come early in the season. When we look at all of these storms in the breakdown of the storms over time, what we find is we've had more than 80 tropical systems hit Louisiana since 1900. 80 tropical systems in 120 years. That's better than one every other year. And of those 80, half of them were hurricanes. So it's not just a matter of tropical storms, but hurricanes are a big part of our tropical history. And by the way, I hear too many people say it was just a tropical storm. No, tropical storms take off roofs. Tropical storms produce massive flooding. It doesn't have to be a hurricane to be destructive here in the Bayou State. So what you do see, though, is that August and September account for about 2/3 of our tropical hits over the course of time. All right, I like this slide because this is a reminder of just how busy things can be. This is just the last 20 years, 2001 to 2020. And truth is, folks, I could talk about this slide for 30 minutes. I won't. But I want you to look at some of the things that comes up here. Number one, look at how many years there was at least one storm, or flip around. Look how few years were absolutely quiet. Well, over that 20-year stretch, we've only got about 7 years where no storm impacted Louisiana. So it's been very busy. In fact, this is the busiest 20 years in history for Louisiana. But the other thing I want you to notice is one, 2, 3, 4. 4 of those 20 years, we had multiple hits, including 4 hits in 2002, and of course there was the devastating year of 2005 with Katrina and Rita. In fact, many people even forget we got hit by a 3rd hurricane that year, in fact early in the season, Cindy. So again, what I'm trying to do here is to reinforce for you the reason you need to be getting prepared in May, not June or July, because we do get hit a lot. In fact, I ask people often, what's the hurricane state? What state should be labeled the hurricane state? And most people get it right. It should be Florida. But it's because Florida has 1,200 miles of coastline. Per mile of coastline, Louisiana gets hit more than Florida. This is a hot zone for tropical weather. So of those 20 seasons, 13 seasons, 2/3 of them had at least one storm. 4 years had multiple hits. And you see 10 hurricanes and 12 tropical storms over those 20 years. More than 1 per year on average. All right, so here are the numbers you need to take away. Forget everything we've talked about. That right there is the #1 rule for why you need to be prepared. There is better than a 50-50 chance in every given year of at least one named storm hitting Louisiana. That is much higher than most people realize. Better than a 50-50 chance. Now, we've already had our one storm with Cristobal, but I don't want you to think we're done for the season. With so early with Cristobal, there's certainly more opportunity for another storm, another couple of storms, given our history and the activity that we can expect. And on average, we get 7 named storms every decade. So again, that's actually above 50-50, 7 out of 10 years, but keep in mind, of those 10 years, 1 or 2 of them on average are going to have multiple hits, multiple landfalls. All right, a little bit of science here, so strap on your seatbelt. What we're going to look at, first off, I just want you to notice how all the lines are going down. Here's the timeline, 1970, this goes to about 2018, and all the lines are sloping down. That's a good thing, because this is a presentation of the forecast error. So the forecast error is getting smaller. Each line represents a time frame. So the red line is the 24-hour forecast, 48-hour forecast, 72-hour forecast. Well, let's make this simple. Let's just focus on the 24-hour forecast. And you see it has been going down. The average error in the forecast for every storm. So what the Hurricane Center did was they go all the way back to the very beginning of every storm, and they look up where they forecasted it would be and where it ended up 24 hours later. And they do the math over time. Back in 1970, the forecast just for 24 hours, the forecast for tomorrow of where the storm was going to be, was an average of more than 125 miles off. We've had some improvements because the line is going down. In 1990, with this line going down, in 1990, we dropped it to 100 miles. 100 miles in 24 hours. So that's like a storm that you think is coming here to Livingston Parish. In the next 24 hours, it could end up in Eunice or Gulfport. That is a huge window. Well, we're improving it still. In fact, now, the forecast is down to less than 50-mile error. It's about 40 to 45-mile error for 24 hours. That's way less. A third of what it was in 1970, less than half of what it was just 30 years ago. But for many of you, that's still unacceptable because 24 hours is still the difference between a storm that you think is coming to Livingston Parish and ends up in Slidell or in the Atchafalaya Basin. That's a huge window of uncertainty. And my point here is that even when we think we know where a storm is going to be tomorrow, you can't presume that they got it right. Now, the truth of the matter is really the forecast gets a little better than this for storms that are approaching land. Because this forecast, this average error includes everything from storms all the way out in the eastern Atlantic to ones that are right in our backyard. The bottom line is it's not clear as to how quickly those storms may shift. And we saw that with Cristobal. Remember, we thought that storm was going to come right over top of Baton Rouge a day before it made landfall, it ended up going right over top of the Crescent City, about 30 to 40 miles farther to the east. All right, here's another perspective. And a lot of people ask me about how we track those storms and forecast where they're going to go. Well, here's rule number one. And you're just going to have to take my word for this for now. Given the option, all tropical storms like to head towards the North Pole. So they all effectively want to go north. However, and this is the part that most people don't think about, tropical storms don't steer themselves. They float in the river of air currents in the atmosphere. They're like a top on your kitchen floor. You put it down on the floor and it's just going to sit there until somebody turns a fan on, and then it's going to move away from the fan. Tropical storms float over the ocean driven by the wind current. So what I want you to do with this animation here is, first off, let's look at the currents down here near the equator, because this is the zone where most of the tropical storms develop. And if you look at it and bear with it a little bit, you probably get the impression that these clouds are drifting from east to west. They're called the easterlies. That's why when we see a storm out here, we start tracking it immediately, because we know it's coming this way. Now look at the clouds, especially up over the United States. By the way, just get your bearings. Make sure you know where you are now. Atlantic Ocean, Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, eastern half of the U.S. And I think you'll see that those clouds over the U.S. are heading in the other direction. So you've got steering winds that move from east to west near the tropics, steering winds that tend to move west to east up in the mid-latitudes north of Louisiana. And you've got a storm that, if it has its own way, wants to go that direction. So think about a storm that plunks down right here. And it's being steered by the currents, but it wants to go north until it runs into those westerlies. And now you see why. You ever notice how most hurricanes, a lot of times they want to hook? Why do they always get over here and then end up coming towards us? Because they want to go north. And if the winds will allow that, they will. So that's just an example track. What are the storms we worry about? They're the ones that don't turn north until later. Those are the ones that are a problem for us. And what are the ones we like to see? The ones that turn north sooner. Those are the storms we get to track and not worry about. So, in a simplified sense, what causes this more westward or more eastward shift in the ultimate track? And most of that is based on high pressure over the Atlantic Ocean. Many of you have heard it called the Bermuda High. Some people call it the Azores High. But think of this as a dome sitting on the ocean that storms can't go through. They've got to go around it. And that dome spins clockwise. So now you see why the storms make that rotation. And the question becomes, is this dome of high pressure this big, or does it extend all the way into the Gulf of Mexico? When it extends into the Gulf, that's when we've got a setup that will push storms into our area. Now keep in mind, all this is tied into happenstance. First off, you got to see how big is that dome of high pressure. Then you got to have a system out here to track in the first place. So it's all a matter of good luck, bad luck in terms of what might develop. So think about this now. We're talking about a storm out here in the eastern Atlantic. And you want me to tell you whether it's going to impact Louisiana. Now, a storm out there is 7 to 10 days away typically. So to figure out where this storm is going to go, remember, it doesn't steer itself. What we have to do is forecast how the atmosphere is going to move over an area that large. And we've got to forecast it out 5, 6, 7 days. We've got to be right as to not only what's going on right now, but what's going to be happening 5 days from now to figure out how that storm is going to cross the Atlantic, when is it going to turn north, and is it going to come into the Gulf of Mexico. Look at that map. Remember, a 24-hour error is 50 miles. What's 50 miles on that map? It's a pencil point. A 50-mile error at 24 hours out from a meteorological standpoint, is a slam dunk hit. It is a perfect forecast. The problem is for you, 50 miles difference is the difference between a little bit of rain and losing that roof. And that is a huge difference in terms of the impacts on the community. So I want you to be hurricane ready. And now is the time to do it. If you don't have your tools together, the tools that Brandy and Charlotte talked about in the previous segment, do it now. Go online, get a game plan. It's a great place to start. So when I say hurricane preparedness, I want you to think about a couple of things. First off is assessing your family's readiness. How many are in your family? And you think, well, you don't know how many kids I've got? No. What I want you to be thinking about is your extended family. Some of you deal with the single mother down the street. Some of you take care of the elderly couple next door. That's your extended family. You've got to be thinking about not only are you going to take care of the people that live in your house, but all the people that count on you to be prepared for Thursday and Friday. Now they're going to be counting on you to prepare for Hurricane Bob or Hurricane Janet. What are their ages? Younger kids are going to have a tougher time with tropical systems than older kids. You need to think about that. And states of health are a big issue. States of health may be the number one deciding factor as to whether you stay or whether you go. If you've got family members that absolutely have to have 24-hour access to electric power and you don't have a heavy-duty generator, you may be thinking, I've got to go for this health and welfare of my family. Then there's the second point, assessing your property's readiness. And for some of you, property is not just your home, it's also your business. And so you got to know what the flood threat is. Now, many of you are more than aware of that after August 2016. You got to know what the wind threat is. What do the trees look like around your property? How healthy are they? What are the chances one of those trees are going to come down on your carport? And then I say walk your yard. And what I'm talking about that is just go through the yard and pick up and secure those things that could become little missiles or projectiles if the wind picks up. Worst thing that could possibly happen is a lawn chair gets slammed up against the garage door simply because you didn't put it away. And there's a divot that'll be there for life. So that's what I mean. Walk your yard, evaluate where the fears and successes are. And then here's a big one. And most of you have responded very positively to this. But for those of you that have, should I consider flood insurance? Again, 2016 changed everything. I know that. And I'm still sympathetic. I know some of you out there watching this still haven't recovered from almost 4 years ago. Well, I have two questions to ask yourself. And you're going to think that I'm making a joke here. And it is trying to be a little lighthearted, but it's not a joke. Question number one, do you live in South Louisiana? Question number two, has it ever rained in your backyard? If you can say yes to both of these, you really, really, really need to think about flood insurance if you don't have it already. And look, I'm not a paid spokesperson here. I am a believer in flood insurance. I have a flood insurance, and I don't live anywhere near the 100-year floodplain. And let me show you why. A couple of reasons here why I think flood insurance is especially important. Why you need to get flood insurance a good thing. For many of you, outside of the high-risk zones, you can get flood insurance for about $500 or less per year. Now look, I don't have $500 to just throw away either. But the bottom line is, on a 30-year mortgage, 30 times 500 would be $15,000. $15,000 paid out over 30 years to protect your property. The last year that the assessment was done, the average payout for a flooded property was 40 grand. So the bottom line is, you're going to insure your property for a third of what it would cost if it flooded next year. Math is there. $500, basically $1.50 a day. It's not easy, but it's something to absolutely consider, given what could happen and given what did happen to many of you just a handful of years ago. This is a big one. 1 in 5 of the property payouts to the flood insurance program are for properties outside of the 100-year flood zone. Look, folks, that 100-year flood zone is at best guess of where the water is going to go. And with your rapidly growing parish here, that flood zone boundaries, those are changing almost daily. So even though the map says you do need it, you don't need it, the truth is you need it if you live in this parish, in almost any part of the parish. And then lastly, a property on the edge of that 100-year zone, if we assume even those maps are exactly right, a property on the edge of that 100-year zone has a 1 in 4 chance of taking water over a 30-year period. That's much higher than most of us realize. 1 in 4 chance that you're going to get water in your house. So back to that 15,000 over 30 years, you are going to spend more in repairs. At $500 a year, it is, I think, a wise investment. The other thing I want you to do is, if you haven't done so, check with your insurer, your home insurer, because your policy may have a hurricane or a named storm waiver, and different companies handle it differently. Some of them, that kicks in as soon as the storm moves into the Gulf. So you need to be aware of that, because that could change up to 5% of the cost that will come out of your pocket before the insurance company starts to pay for damages. And by the way, when we talk about national flood insurance payouts, the last 10 big events going back to 2018, of the 10 biggest events in terms of flood losses, Louisiana was involved in 6 of them. 6 of the 10 biggest events included our state, and of course, August 2016, right there as one of them. Flood insurance, I truly do believe it's a smart investment, even though it's a tough one for many of us to work into our monthly budget. And so with that, I've come to sort of a conclusion here. I thank you for the time that you've spent with me. I hope that you've learned a little bit of something. You can reach out to me at WAFB if you have any specific questions. I love working with the parish here in terms of getting prepared for weather, and I even work with Brandi and her group, LOHSEP, when weather does impact the parish. It's been a long time practice of mine to be as accessible during severe weather as possible. Thank you for your time. Have a great summer.